Good morning. I'm Harley HarleySchlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for March 22nd, 2023. There's a famous poem by Robert Frost called The Road Not Taken, which describes the dilemma, which is fairly common, an indecision about which way to go at a moment of choice, which choice to make. Now, he said it was written as a joke, but he also said that oftentimes for him, jokes are there to highlight some more serious questions. And I would say that we should look at this from that standpoint. It opens by saying, "Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other." Now he goes on to describe some of the process of thinking, which one was the best road to take, doubting that he could ever come back, and he concludes it by saying, "I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." Now, today we have a situation like that in the world. There are two roads diverging, one to hell, the other to peaceful coexistence. You have to choose. There's an incredible clarity on the growing gap between the two roads. One, the demand of the arrogant Anglo-Americans to continue full speed ahead on the unipolar order, or to take the exit toward cooperation for mutual benefit. Now, given the incredible pace of developments, these decisions have to be made quickly because we're heading toward a branch point. The unipolar order is heading toward a dead end, with potentially catastrophic consequences for all mankind. Now, what do we see on the unipolar road? Well, Biden, Stoltenberg, Scholz, Baerbock, the Baltic countries, they're all insisting that there be no negotiations. You can't negotiate with the Russians. Stick with Ukraine as long as it takes and as much as it costs. Now, the costs include significant loss of life on both sides, as well as the boomerang effect of sanctions, the spending on war, and the growing dissatisfaction of populations in the Western world. Some of these developments are almost impossible to imagine how these choices are being made. Zelensky, who of course is a puppet of NATO, has said he will not negotiate with Putin. And now the International Criminal Court indictment against Putin is being held up as a reason why you cannot talk to Putin and that Putin is isolated. And what was the indictment for? Saving the lives of children in the Donbass by moving them to the relative safety of Russia. Now, we're seeing, in terms of the unwillingness to negotiate, we're seeing the Polish government now announcing they will send jets to Kiev. We have Japan's Prime Minister Kishida, who is calling for rearmament and Japan becoming a military ally of the United States and the United Kingdom. Kishida was in Kiev yesterday making his pilgrimage to the shrine of Zelensky. But at the same time, we see the International Monetary Fund authorizing a $15 billion loan to Ukraine on top of the 120 plus billion that's already been allocated and pledged by the US and NATO. A huge volume of funds going into a dead-end war. This is now acknowledged by major press, which so far had been totally pro-war. The Washington Post and the New York Times, for example, had articles in the last week warning that Ukraine cannot win, citing unnamed officials who are perplexed and unhappy about the prospects of a Ukrainian victory, going so far as to say maybe now is the time to negotiate. And there's a growing risk as this war continues of a direct US-NATO confrontation with Russia, which could lead to nuclear strikes. Then add on top of that the explosive financial, banking, economic crisis in the West, where we're seeing millions of people going into the streets because they can't afford housing, can't afford food and fuel and medical costs. And instead, what's the proposal from the West? Bailouts of the speculators and austerity in what Josep Borrell, the foreign minister of the EU, calls the garden. So the question then is, where does the exit ramp lead? And the exit ramp is based on an idea which has been forgotten in the West, called diplomacy, negotiation, compromise, discussion. The war with Russia, and possibly one with China, is based on a refusal to acknowledge that these two countries have legitimate security concerns that have been neglected and, in fact, rejected by their Western so-called partners. It's the arrogance of the imperial mindset, which says we're prepared to go to war if you don't play by our rules. And that's explicitly stated in this concept of the rules-based order. So where is the diplomatic road lead? Well, we see the Putin-Xi summit ongoing with expressions of deep commitment to each nation's development, economic cooperation, growth of trade, investment in infrastructure, based on the concept of peace through cooperation for mutual benefit. And this, of course, is the great fear of the Western geopoliticians, that China and Russia, as a unified force, cannot be defeated militarily and will not accept giving up their sovereignty for the sake of peace with the Western imperial powers. Then we see the Chinese role in the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement, the end of 7 years of diplomatic non-recognition, harsh rhetoric, and actual proxy warfare going on in Yemen. We now see a move toward economic cooperation, with China talking about working with Iran and Saudi Arabia for development of the whole of West Asia. King Salman has invited Iran's President Raisi to Riyadh for talks on how to proceed with this. There are indications that the war in Yemen may be coming to an end with an agreement between Yemen and Saudi Arabia for a prisoner exchange. You also had the visit of President Assad of Syria to Moscow for talks, which include, on the sidelines, Turkey and Iran in talking about reconstruction of Syria. And then Assad went to the United Arab Emirates, which had been funding some of the networks of terrorists that the Assad government has been fighting. An official from the United Arab Emirates said it's time now to reintegrate Syria into the Arab community. And he said, quote, "Take the enemies of the past and transform them into the friends of tomorrow," unquote. A very worthwhile approach. Then you have Iraq and Iran meeting to discuss finally ending the disputes over the border between them. And in general, we can say that the global South has been transformed by the war in Ukraine, NATO's war against Russia. The global South has been transformed into a global majority looking not just for peace, but peace so that the real development needs of sovereign nations can be met. Peace through development. And what's the response of the State Department, expressing the legacy of Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski and Madeleine Albright, who famously declared 500,000 Iraqi children dying was a price worthwhile to bring down Saddam? The State Department said calls for a ceasefire coming from Russia or China are, quote, unacceptable, unquote. And the potential for development through investment, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative of China, they reject as Chinese aggression and a debt trap, when in fact the debt trap has been the policy of the Western imperial powers for the last 2 centuries. So we come up to a choice that has to be made. The poetic expression of a higher potential actually should ring in the ears of those people having to make these choices. And I conclude with this. There are 2 roads diverging. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.